Rome, the beating heart of an empire that ruled the known world. Its emperors were gods on earth, wielding unimaginable power, yet living in a world of shadows, conspiracies, and blood. And among them, none has left a darker, more scandalous legacy than Nero Claudius Caesar, the emperor who murdered his family, the ruler who massacred his enemies, the tyrant who turned persecution into theater, and the man who watched, or so the story goes, as his own city burned to the ground. But who was Nero? Was he a madman born to destroy Rome, or a visionary destroyed by power? Tonight we dive into the life of Rome's most infamous emperor, a tale of ambition, blood, and fire. Nero's story begins not in glory, but in a dynasty dripping with paranoia, ambition, and murder. He was born Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus in December 37 AD, the only child of Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus and Agrippina the Younger. His family lineage was as dangerous as it was prestigious. Through his mother, Agrippina, Nero was the great-great-grandson of Augustus, Rome's first emperor. Through his father, he was tied to the aristocratic but notoriously ruthless Domiti family. From the very beginning, his life was stained by blood. His father, Gnaeus Domitius, was described by historians as violent and immoral, a man who once killed a freedman on the road simply because he was in his way. His mother, Agrippina, was no less dangerous. She was the sister of Caligula, Rome's most notorious mad emperor, and a woman known for her ferocious ambition. According to Suetonius, when Agrippina gave birth to Nero, an astrologer warned that the boy was destined to bring ruin to the empire. Agrippina is said to have replied coldly, "Let him kill me so long as he rules." It was a chilling prophecy that would come true, but Nero's childhood was anything but secure. In 39 AD, his uncle Caligula turned against Agrippina, accusing her of conspiracy. She was banished from Rome. Nero, just a toddler, was sent away to live with his aunt Domitia Lepida. He grew up largely without his mother, in the shadow of imperial politics. His father died when Nero was only 2. Some sources suggest poison may have been involved. Others claim disease. Whatever the truth, it left Nero fatherless, with a mother in exile. For the first years of his life, Nero was little more than a pawn in the deadly chess game of Roman politics. When Caligula was assassinated in 41 AD, everything changed. His uncle Claudius became emperor. Agrippina returned from exile, determined to reclaim her place in Rome. She knew that her son, young Lucius, could be her pathway to power, but she had rivals. Claudius already had a son, Britannicus, who was the natural heir. If Nero was to rise, Agrippina had to outmaneuver everyone. She began carefully. She cultivated alliances with influential senators, and even with the emperor's freedmen, powerful bureaucrats who whispered in Claudius's ear. Then she struck strategically. She seduced Claudius himself. In 49 AD, Agrippina married her own uncle, the Emperor Claudius. It was scandalous, but it gave her exactly what she wanted, a foothold at the very center of imperial power. Soon after, she persuaded Claudius to adopt her son. Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus became Nero Claudius Caesar, heir to the Roman throne. To secure the dynasty further, Agrippina arranged a marriage between Nero and Claudius's daughter Octavia, but Britannicus remained a threat. As Claudius's biological son, he had a stronger claim. Agrippina would not risk it. In 54 AD, Claudius fell suddenly ill and died. Ancient sources whisper that he was poisoned, most likely by Agrippina herself, with mushrooms laced in death. And just like that, Agrippina's plan succeeded. At only 16 years old, Nero was emperor of Rome. Imagine Rome in 54 AD. The empire stretched from the sands of Egypt to the moors of Britain. Legions guarded its borders. Senators debated in marble halls. And at the top of this vast world sat a boy. Nero was handsome, youthful, and charismatic. He promised renewal, prosperity, a new golden age. The people adored him. Coins bore his face. Festivals celebrated his rule. But Nero was not truly in charge, at least not at first. Behind the throne stood 2 men, the philosopher Seneca, who became his tutor and advisor, and the general Burrus, commander of the Praetorian Guard. Together they tried to shape the boy emperor into a just and balanced ruler. At the same time, Agrippina still wielded enormous power. Coins were minted with both her face and Nero's, a clear sign she saw herself as co-ruler. She sat beside him in public audiences, gave instructions to officials, and even received foreign ambassadors. Rome had never seen a woman exercise such authority, and Nero, still a teenager, resented it. At first, things went well. The early years of Nero's reign were marked by generosity. Taxes were lowered, gladiatorial games and public feasts delighted the crowds. Seneca's influence pushed him toward clemency and fairness. For a brief moment it seemed the young emperor might rule wisely, but soon, cracks appeared. The first shadow fell in 55 AD. Claudius's son Britannicus was nearly of age. Once he turned 14 he could claim his rightful inheritance. Whispers spread that Agrippina still favored him as a backup heir. At a banquet Britannicus suddenly collapsed, choking and gasping. Within moments he was dead. Suetonius and Tacitus both point to Nero as the murderer, claiming he had him poisoned. The boy emperor had struck down his foster brother. Rome's elite shuddered. The mask of innocence was slipping. And then came the conflict with Agrippina. Nero had fallen in love with a married woman, Poppaea Sabina, famed for her beauty and ambition. But Agrippina opposed the relationship. She reminded him that he was married to Octavia. She lectured him on duty. She demanded obedience. Nero, now a man, refused. He stripped his mother of her honors. Her guards were removed. She was forced from the palace to live in isolation. Agrippina, furious, began plotting. Tacitus tells us she threatened to ally with Britannicus's supporters, or even with Octavia, to overthrow Nero. Others claim she tried seduction, using her beauty even with her own son to regain control. Whether true or not, Nero was horrified. He decided she had to die. The first attempt was elaborate. Nero invited her to a banquet, then had her return home by boat. But this was no ordinary vessel. It was designed to collapse mid-sea, plunging Agrippina into the water. The plan failed. Agrippina swam to shore, bruised but alive. When Nero learned she had survived, panic gripped him. His mother knew the truth. She would destroy him. There could be no second chance. In 59 AD, Nero sent assassins to her villa at Baiae. Agrippina's own guards fled. The killers stormed inside. According to Tacitus, when the commander struck, Agrippina bared her stomach and cried, "Strike here where the monster was born!" She was murdered in her own bedchamber. The emperor had killed his own mother. News spread quickly. Nero claimed it was suicide, the act of a guilty woman caught in conspiracy. But no one believed him. Senators whispered. Citizens recoiled. Even his advisors, Seneca and Burrus, realized their emperor had crossed a line. Rome now had not a boy emperor, but a tyrant, and Nero was just getting started. The death of Agrippina was more than just a family tragedy. It was a turning point. The empire had seen fratricide before, poisonings, assassinations. But for an emperor to murder his own mother? It sent shockwaves through Rome. Even Nero himself could not escape the horror. For weeks afterward he was haunted by nightmares. He claimed to see his mother's ghost, her face pale, her hair dripping with seawater, her wounds still bleeding. He turned to magicians, priests, and fortune-tellers for protection, but nothing silenced the guilt. And yet, guilt did not stop him from embracing the role of tyrant. At first Nero tried to justify the killing. He spread rumors that Agrippina had plotted to overthrow him. He reminded the Senate of her ambition and her domination. But whispers spread. If Nero could kill his own mother, who was safe? Seneca and Burrus, his two closest advisors, tried desperately to keep him balanced. They urged him to govern wisely, to focus on justice and stability, but Nero was changing. The boy who had once listened to philosophers now craved only two things, pleasure and power. His marriage to Octavia, Claudius's daughter, soured completely. Octavia was dutiful, modest, and well-loved by the Roman people. But Nero despised her. She reminded him of Agrippina's influence, of his past obligations. Instead he obsessed over Poppaea Sabina. Poppaea was everything Octavia was not, glamorous, ambitious, sensual. She encouraged Nero's worst impulses, whispering in his ear that he should be free, that he should rule without restraint, that Octavia was an obstacle. By 62 AD, Nero finally cast Octavia aside. He accused her of infertility and adultery, charges that were almost certainly false, and had her exiled to the island of Pandateria. The Roman people erupted in anger. Crowds gathered in the forum demanding Octavia's return. They tore down statues of Poppaea. They hailed Octavia as their true empress, but Nero would not be defied. Within weeks he ordered Octavia's execution. The method was cruel. She was bound, her veins cut open, and she was suffocated in a steam bath. Her head was then delivered to Poppaea. Octavia, beloved by Rome, was dead. And with her death, Nero showed that not even the love of the people could restrain his brutality. It was not just family Nero destroyed. He turned on the Senate, the nobility, and even his closest allies. The most infamous purge came with the discovery of the Pisonian conspiracy in 65 AD. This plot, led by Gaius Calpurnius Piso, involved senators, knights, officers, and even poets who sought to assassinate Nero and replace him with a more stable ruler. The conspiracy was exposed before it could act. Nero's response was merciless. Hundreds were executed, their families ruined. Some were forced to commit suicide. Among them was Seneca, Nero's old tutor, the man who had once guided him as a boy. The death of Seneca became legendary. Forced to open his veins, the philosopher calmly discussed Stoic principles with his friends as his life drained away. To the Roman elite, it was the death of wisdom itself, and proof that Nero was now a tyrant without restraint. But Nero's paranoia extended even further. He ordered the deaths of generals, nobles, and even his foster brother's supporters years after Britannicus had already been poisoned. Anyone who so much as looked at him with suspicion risked execution. The empire lived in fear, informants thrived, friends turned on friends, children betrayed parents, slaves betrayed masters, all to curry favor with the emperor. And Nero? He delighted in it. But his madness did not end with murder. It also seeped into his obsessions. Nero saw himself not just as an emperor but as an artist, a musician, a performer. He played the lyre, sang poetry, and dreamed of the stage. In private, this might have been harmless, but Nero forced the empire to become his audience. Senators, generals, foreign ambassadors, all were required to attend his endless performances. They sat in silence as the emperor recited verses or sang operas, terrified to show boredom. Some faked illness or even pretended to faint just to escape. Cassius Dio tells us that women gave birth in the theater during his performances, and men feigned death, simply because leaving was forbidden. Nero had turned Rome into his stage, and soon he would turn it into his pyre. In July of 64 AD, disaster struck. A fire ignited in the Circus Maximus, where wooden shops and oil-filled warehouses lined the streets. In the sweltering summer heat, flames spread rapidly. The city's narrow alleys and densely packed houses became kindling. For 6 days Rome burned, temples collapsed, statues melted, whole neighborhoods vanished. When the flames finally subsided, 2/3 of the city was destroyed. Tacitus, Rome's greatest historian, tells us that countless lives were lost. Families were wiped out. Sacred shrines vanished. The air was filled with smoke and the screams of the dying. And in the midst of it all, rumors spread like wildfire. Nero had started the blaze himself. Some claimed he wanted to clear land for a new palace. Others said he craved the thrill of destruction. The most enduring rumor was that he had stood on a tower, strumming his lyre, and sung of the fall of Troy while his own capital turned to ash. Was it true? Tacitus admits the evidence was uncertain, but the rumor was too powerful to die. Even today, Nero is remembered as the emperor who fiddled while Rome burned. What is certain is this: while Rome smoldered, Nero seized the opportunity. He built his dream, the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. It was not just a palace, but a city within a city. Its walls gleamed with gold leaf. Ceilings were inlaid with jewels and ivory. Artificial lakes reflected painted frescoes. Rooms were designed to rotate, imitating the movement of the heavens. The people of Rome, homeless and starving, looked upon this obscene luxury and saw proof of Nero's guilt. Their city had burned, and from the ashes, the emperor built a palace for himself. Nero needed someone to blame. He turned to a small, despised sect, the Christians. At the time, Christians were a marginal group, seen as strange, secretive, and subversive. They refused to worship the Roman gods, rejected the emperor's divinity, and held secret rites that many misunderstood. To traditional Romans they seemed dangerous. Nero exploited this fear. He accused the Christians of setting the fire. His propaganda machine spread the tale, and soon the fury of Rome turned against them. But mere execution was not enough. Nero turned punishment into spectacle. Christians were rounded up, tortured, and slaughtered in grotesque ways. Some were crucified, others were sewn into the skins of wild animals and torn apart by dogs. The most horrifying were those turned into living torches. Soaked in oil, they were tied to stakes and set alight, burning alive to illuminate Nero's gardens during his evening parties. Guests strolled among flaming corpses as the emperor entertained them with music and games. Tacitus, no friend of the Christians, admitted that the brutality was excessive. He wrote, "A vast multitude were convicted, not so much of the crime of firing the city, as of hatred against mankind. Mockery was added to their deaths. Covered in the hides of beasts, they were torn by dogs. Others were set on fire to serve as nightly illumination. Nero offered his gardens for the spectacle. It was massacre on a scale that horrified even Rome, a city accustomed to blood. And yet Nero reveled in it. He turned persecution into theater, cruelty into performance. For him, Rome was no longer just an empire. It was a stage upon which he played the role of God and judge. But the fire and the massacres had consequences. Discontent grew deeper. Whispers of revolt began to spread. Nero's enemies were multiplying, and his appetite for blood was not yet satisfied. By the mid-60s AD, Nero's reign had become a spiral of paranoia, fear, and massacre. The Pisonian conspiracy of 65 AD was the spark that unleashed his most ruthless purge. The conspiracy was vast, involving senators, equestrians, soldiers, even poets, united by one goal: to rid Rome of its tyrant. Their chosen replacement was Gaius Calpurnius Piso, a wealthy senator with popular support. But like so many plots in Roman history, it was betrayed before it could act. A freedman named Milicus revealed the scheme, and Nero's wrath fell upon Rome. The executions were merciless. Noble families were destroyed. Wives were forced to denounce husbands, children to accuse parents. Senators were dragged into the forum and condemned to death. Soldiers who had whispered support for Piso were executed in camps. Tacitus records that at least 41 conspirators were killed, though the true number was likely far higher, for Nero's purges did not stop with those directly involved. Anyone suspected of sympathy was marked for death. The most famous victim was Seneca, Nero's old tutor and one of Rome's greatest philosophers. Once a guiding hand in Nero's youth, Seneca had withdrawn from politics, but suspicion still clung to him. Nero ordered him to commit suicide. Seneca complied with calm dignity. In his villa, surrounded by friends, he slit his wrists. When the blood flowed too slowly, he drank poison, but even then death would not come. Finally, he was placed in a hot bath, suffocated by steam, as he dictated final words of Stoic wisdom. But Seneca was not the only one. The poet Lucan, famed for his epic Pharsalia, was also implicated. He too was ordered to take his own life. According to Suetonius, his final act was to recite verses from his poem as he bled out. Even members of Nero's inner circle were not safe. The brilliant general Faenius Rufus, commander of the Praetorian Guard, was executed despite years of loyalty. So too was Subrius Flavus, another officer. Their deaths sent shock waves through the legions, proof that even Rome's defenders could fall to Nero's paranoia. The executions did not stop there. Waves of accusations followed. Informants thrived, denouncing neighbors and rivals. The air of fear was suffocating. Nero's Rome had become a city where trust was poison, and every whispered word could mean death. And yet, in the midst of the bloodshed, Nero indulged his fantasies. He staged elaborate festivals, performed before crowds, and reveled in his power. While senators bled, the emperor sang. But even his personal life became a theater of cruelty. His obsession with Poppaea Sabina, the woman for whom he had divorced and executed Octavia, turned deadly. In 65 AD, Poppaea was pregnant. During a heated argument, Nero struck her violently in the abdomen. The blow killed both her and the unborn child. Rome was horrified. Even Nero's supporters struggled to excuse the act. Yet the emperor mourned in his own twisted way. He gave her a lavish funeral, embalming her body with spices and building a golden statue in her honor. But the stain remained. Nero had murdered not only his mother, his foster brother, and his wife Octavia, but also the woman he loved most. Still, his appetites only grew darker. Soon after, he became infatuated with a young boy named Sporus, who bore a resemblance to Poppaea. In one of the most scandalous acts of his reign, Nero had the boy castrated, dressed him as his dead wife, and held a public wedding ceremony. The emperor of Rome had married a eunuch in the guise of the woman he had beaten to death. He paraded Sporus as his empress, forcing Rome to witness his madness, and all the while the empire trembled under his massacres. As Nero's paranoia deepened, his reign descended into grotesque decadence. He no longer saw himself as Rome's emperor. Instead, he fancied himself a god, an artist, a performer, and the empire was forced to watch. He organized vast festivals where he competed as a singer, musician, and actor. Senators and nobles were compelled to attend, unable to leave under threat of death. Cassius Dio tells us of women giving birth during his endless recitals, of men pretending to faint or even die in order to escape. Others smeared dung in their mouths so they could claim illness. Nothing worked. Everyone had to endure the emperor's vanity. And Nero did not stop with singing. He entered chariot races, gladiatorial games, even theatrical plays where he portrayed gods and heroes. But unlike ordinary actors, Nero demanded genuine emotion. In one performance, he played Orestes, who kills his mother. With chilling irony, Nero acted out matricide on stage, a crime he had committed in reality. In another, he portrayed Hercules, strangling serpents as a child. The audience knew the subtext. Nero saw himself as a demigod, destined for greatness. But his greatest obsession was Greece. In 66 AD, Nero traveled there, determined to compete in every festival, the Olympic Games, the Pythian Games, the Isthmian Games. Of course he won every contest. Judges dared not deny him. Even when he fell from his chariot during a race, the crown was still awarded to him. He returned to Rome with over 1,800 victory prizes, showered upon him by terrified officials. Nero paraded through the streets, basking in the cheers of a forced audience, but beneath the surface, resentment grew. The people saw their emperor wasting fortunes on his fantasies while Rome starved. Senators saw their dignity mocked as they bowed to a man who fancied himself an actor. The legions saw a ruler more obsessed with music than with war, and still the massacres continued. In 67 AD, Nero turned his wrath upon the nobility once more. Any whisper of disloyalty was punished with exile, confiscation, or death. He executed generals accused of treason. He slaughtered the families of conspirators. He filled the treasury with blood money, seizing estates and wealth from the dead. Even the common people, once his base of support, began to sour. Food shortages racked the city, taxes grew unbearable. The lavish Domus Aurea, his golden palace, was a constant reminder of his excess. Rome had become a city of spectacle and terror, but the empire was not just Rome. Beyond its walls the provinces simmered with revolt. In Britain, Queen Boudica had led a rebellion that massacred tens of thousands. In Judea, the great Jewish revolt raged, demanding brutal Roman response. In Gaul and Spain, governors whispered of mutiny. Nero, consumed by his vanity, ignored the cracks spreading across the empire. He sang, he raced, he played, and when challenged, he bled Rome further. By 68 AD, the empire was ready to turn against him. The Senate hated him. The people no longer trusted him. The legions were restless. Nero had ruled through fear, blood, and spectacle. But fear has limits. And when it broke, Rome would erupt. By 68 AD, the cracks in Nero's empire had grown into fissures. For over a decade he had ruled with blood and spectacle, killing his family, his rivals, his wives, and even his mentor Seneca. He had drenched Rome in massacres, from the Christians burned alive after the Great Fire, to the nobles purged in the Pisonian conspiracy. But now, his ruthless hand no longer inspired fear, it inspired revolt. The first blow came from Gaul. Gaius Julius Vindex, the governor of the province, raised the standard of rebellion. He denounced Nero as a disgrace to Rome, a singer, an actor, a murderer. He called upon the legions to join him in overthrowing the tyrant. For a moment, Nero laughed. He saw himself as untouchable. Had he not crushed conspiracies before? Had not fear silenced the Senate and chained the people? But this time, it was different. The legions of Hispania, under Servius Sulpicius Galba, also rebelled. Galba declared himself legatus senatus populique Romani, the representative of the Senate and people of Rome, in other words, the rightful emperor. The Praetorian Guard, once Nero's sword and shield, turned against him. Nero's endless spending and paranoia had drained their loyalty. When Galba promised them bribes and rewards, they abandoned the tyrant they had once sworn to protect. For the first time in his reign, Nero stood alone. The Senate, emboldened, declared him a public enemy. The man who had styled himself as a god, who had demanded crowns in Greece and worship in Rome, was now condemned as a criminal. Nero panicked. He fled the palace, disguised in shabby clothes, accompanied by only a handful of freedmen. He rushed through the night, trying desperately to find a place to hide. According to Suetonius, he begged them to dig him a grave in secret, fearing the mob would mutilate his body. He muttered that the world would lose a great artist. But no one came to save him. Finally, he took refuge in a villa outside Rome. As the hoofbeats of soldiers thundered closer, Nero realized the end had come. He paced in terror, muttering, "Qualis artifex pareo? What an artist dies in me." Too afraid to act, he begged his companions to kill him. None would raise the blade. At last, with soldiers breaking down the gates, Nero seized a dagger. With the help of his secretary Epaphroditus, he stabbed himself in the throat. When the soldiers entered, they found the emperor of Rome writhing in agony. Nero, the tyrant, the murderer, the singer, the god, was dead. He was 30 years old, and with his death, the Julio-Claudian dynasty, the line of Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, and Claudius, was extinguished forever. Rome erupted into chaos. The year 69 AD would become known as the Year of the Four Emperors, a whirlwind of civil war that nearly tore the empire apart. But one thing was certain, the reign of Nero had ended in blood and shame. What was Nero? A monster? A madman? Or merely the final symptom of an empire poisoned by power? To his enemies, he was a tyrant without equal. the man who murdered his mother, poisoned his foster brother, executed his wives, and drenched Rome in massacres. The man who turned the Christians into human torches, the man who forced philosophers to bleed themselves in their own homes, the man who strangled art itself, twisting theater and music into weapons of tyranny. And yet, his story is more complicated, for even in his cruelty, Nero left behind strange accomplishments. He rebuilt parts of Rome after the Great Fire, introducing new building codes to prevent future disasters. He expanded the empire's cultural life, promoting theater, music, and even athletic competitions. He dreamed of fusing Roman power with Greek artistry, though he did so in ways that humiliated the Senate and shocked tradition. For the common people, especially in the early years, he was not entirely hated. He lowered taxes, ended some capital punishments, and funded public games. And after his death, rumors spread that he was still alive. Across the provinces, pretenders arose, false Neros, claiming to be the emperor returned. Some in the East even welcomed these impostors, hoping the mad tyrant had cheated death. Nero had become a legend, a specter haunting Rome. But history remembers the blood, the massacres of the conspirators, the burning of the Christians, the murder of his own kin. The Rome of Nero was a city where trust could not exist, where art was slavery, where cruelty was law. His life is the story of a boy who became emperor too young, twisted by power, paranoia, and vanity. He could have been a patron of culture, a new Augustus of art. Instead, he became a new Caligula, and worse. When we remember Nero, we remember the blood-stained crown, the burning city, the screams of martyrs, the laughter of a tyrant singing as Rome crumbled. And perhaps that is the truest legacy of Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, a man who tried to be a god but was remembered as a monster.